Welcome to Deathcare Collective. I'm Keith, and I'm the host of the show. My guest today is Rachel Kodanaz. Rachel's from Denver, Colorado, and she's an author, speaker, coach, and consultant on grief and loss. She is really an authority on the topic. She comes at it both from the corporate workplace as well as just the personal context. So she's got something for all of us that we can learn from and be encouraged by. You're going to find her fascinating. I know I do, and I hope you enjoy the show.
All right. Good morning. For those of you that are new to the show, I'm Keith, and I'm so glad you're joining me and us. And I'm here with Rachel Kodanaz. Rachel, hi.
Good job. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad. We've been getting acquainted this last couple of weeks, and I've been doing a deep dive into you. We've been talking, and I'm excited to jump into the stuff we want to talk about today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. Always ready.
Okay, good. So let's jump into when life threw you a curveball. I read in one of your blogs you wrote that, and I've also written about life transitions, and I use the term a curveball. So life threw you a curveball at 31. Tell us about what that was and the results of that for you.
So by profession, IT, telecommunications, many, many years ago, I had the desire to break the glass ceiling of a woman in IT and telecommunications. I am very logical, 1-0 on, off, black, white. I am a very logical person. And my husband and I work for the same company, Sprint. So that gives you an idea of how long ago it was. We both came out of, he was actually government affairs and lobbying against AT&T. And I was actually in the IT area. And we ran 8 miles. We were a big running family. We ran 8 miles for lunch. And I received a phone call at 5:30 so 5 hours, 4 hours after we ran, that there was an emergency and they were bringing Rod to the hospital. I thought maybe it's a car accident. I couldn't imagine anything else. But the net of it is I get to the hospital with my then 2-year-old daughter in my arms. And I walk in and I give my name and they didn't look up, so I knew something was wrong. And then all of a sudden, all these suits, I'll call it suits, because back in those days we wore suits to work, these suits came up and I knew who everybody was standing there. And I was like, okay, this is real. And they just told me that my husband had arrhythmia. They tried to recover him at work and they couldn't, and he lost his life. I was
Wow.
31, he was 32. We had a 2-year-old daughter. Well, as I started off with it, I'm so logical, I
Right.
couldn't compute it. I couldn't, my head, my brain, my heart wouldn't compute that I was standing there with a 2-year-old and that I had a life in front of me.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that the 1-0s don't fit with the idea of death, loss, grief, those things, right?
No, I've been with you my whole life trying to find the number two, find gray instead of black and white, and
Right.
trying to find a dimmer rather than an on-off. I mean, that's my thing, because you have to soften up somewhere and come into the emotional side because you can't remain in that logical side when something like that happens.
Yeah. Had you had experiences with a significant loss, death prior to? Did you have an idea about, oh, one day I'll have to grief stuff, and this is probably what it's like, or was this just all brand new?
One, I think in the first couple months, the shock was so unbearable that I didn't know. And maybe that's part of our makeup, that we have all that hormone stuff that says you stay in shock so you can't even think through what is really happening to you.
Yeah.
And, I had grandparents' losses, but that's not untimely. This was untimely and extremely personal. This was not, someone else's household. This was my household. I mean, when I was growing up, before all the CPAL laws, we had, a carload of kids always died one year. Every school year we had a carload of kids and it was in shock. But while it was in shock, we went off to college. Their families dealt with it forever. I didn't, I mean, I remember, oh, so and so, that's that night that something happened, but it's not as intense and as personal as losing my husband, Rod.
Yeah. Two things right away that stick out in my brain that are helping me frame all of this. Untimely, right? That's a big
Yeah.
word, because older people, grandparents, right, age and die, and that's a type of death. But this is untimely. I get that. And then household, right? If it affects our direct household, immediately, like that's bigger impact than, like you said, even schoolmates and stuff, because our lives go on, but not in that household.
Correct. And that, I call it remarried, but I call him my living husband. Over the years that we've talked about that, because I've been very careful of keeping my daughter inside of my late husband's family. And I always wondered why I felt the way I did, and his brothers and sisters, five of them, how they felt differently. And my living husband would say to me, Rachel, you do it every single day. They don't do it, come holidays, looking at pictures, talking to mom, it comes, into their
Yeah,
forefront, but it's not hanging out every day because they're in a different household.
right. What about his mother?
Well, his mother's gone now, but
Yeah.
at the time she was so grateful. In fact, she wrote a letter to my before when I decided to remarry. She wrote him a letter and graciously thanked him so for raising her son's daughter and just coming into the household. I'm not going to call him a white and shining white, like horse
Right,
came in,
right,
but
right,
right,
right.
but he came in and he helped, and he was remarkable, still is, keeping the Blythe family in, listen, I wouldn't, if anything happened to, in my, well, this is my world, but, if anything, I would always want to keep loved ones close.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, the reason why I asked about his mom originally is, you talked about brothers and sisters, and they go on, but they talk about the when it's out of order, right? Like children are supposed to bury their parents, and here a parent's burying even if it's an adult child. So I wondered how that was for her as well.
So actually, the father is more of a story than his mother. And I think sometimes moms are like that. But this is actually interesting for the listeners. So
Yeah.
my father-in-law, they lived about 4.5 hours away from where we lived when my husband passed away. But they always stayed when they came to town. They always stayed at our house because we had a space for them better than some of his brothers and sisters. So what his father stopped staying. He stayed at the house the night that he passed, but after that he wouldn't stay at my house, and I thought his hand was up to me, like just he didn't, whether it was blame, whatever the reason, right? I thought there was a pushback from him, and I didn't realize this till I fast forward that I ran so many support groups over the last 30 years that I learned for myself, which is I think great for the audience, is that it wasn't that my father-in-law put his hand up to me. He couldn't bear his son's loss. So every time he was around me or my daughter, he thought of his son and he went into his own grief, mourning, whatever else that he had, going on inside of him. It took me years to realize that. So I would love for the audience to think about that a little bit, that we blame ourselves when we're truly grieving, and maybe it's just not our fault. Maybe it's somebody else that is hurting so bad they don't know how to communicate their wants and needs to you.
Yeah. And they have their own way and story going on in them with the grief, the same grief that you have, but a totally different story and feelings around it, right?
And they can't articulate it because, listen,
Right.
how can you? How can you?
Yeah. Right, right. There often aren't words, and our culture hasn't created many words yet, and that's why even the work I do, I still am not always sure how to talk. Even with you, I'm like, oh yeah, it's an interesting conversation, right? Grief.
Right, right, right.
And then do you define differently like grieving and mourning, or is mourning just an old fashioned word for grieving?
So I don't, particularly when I go into the workplace, I don't care for using the words mourning, grieving, or bereavement because
Okay.
I think they're time bound. So
Uh,
for the conversation that we're having, I've used them, but in general, I normally do not use them because
okay.
I would like to, differentiate between it's a lifetime and you have to figure out how to set up that road in front of you, and it's bringing that person forward with you. That I believe in that. You can't leave them back there even 30 years later. You cannot leave them there. You need to bring them with you, and if you time bound your grief, you don't get to have that opportunity to stay connected.
Wow. Okay, that's beautiful. And uh,
Intense.
yeah, so you got to learn that because here you had to go back to the workplace, and then I'm guessing you had all these interesting experiences. If you did go back into the workplace, how did everybody respond around you?
So they run.
Yeah.
They run away because what do you say to a 31-year-old that has a 2-year-old and
Right.
is, what do you say to them? So what's
Yeah.
the easiest thing to do? I remember this a long time ago. Now you could send
Right.
a text message, you could
Right.
send,
A
you could
little.
send food over, but and
Right.
there's so much you could do now to recognize it. Back then it was, you know, the different back then you could hug in the workplace. Now I mean, it depends on what kind of line of work you're in, but
Right.
in corporate
Right.
America, you were not hugging.
Yeah.
So, anyway, they don't know what to say. So, yes, I learned a lot about corporate America and I've been writing about it for years and I've been presenting on it for years. I don't blame the workplace for anything. People, when they're in my presentations, say to me, "How can you say that so bluntly?" And I just don't. Every person is different. You might come to work after you have a loss, just ready to work, Keith, to work really hard. I might come to back to work and just being so absorbed by what's going on in my household that I wouldn't even think about what I need to do at work. So we come back differently.
Yeah. And so you ended up writing a book with this. I know you've written, I think we have three that I for sure that I want to talk about. Maybe you've written more. We'll have to come back, have you back for another session. But was the grief in the workplace the first thing that you wrote about?
Well, what happened was I got a call from at the time, it's the magazine's been sold 3 times and it's an online presence that's been purchased. But at the time, Bereavement Magazine heard about me, reached out to me and said, "Can you write an article about grief in the workplace?" I think somewhere someone had said that I was taking my daughter at the time. I negotiated taking my daughter on my business trips, and they wanted to learn more about that. That's an interesting story in itself. If we do a
Yeah.
segment on grief in the workplace, how I arranged that,
Yeah.
or we could talk about it today, either or. But
Sure.
anyway, she asked me to write an article about it, and whatever viral meant in the 90s, it started that I wrote a column on grief in the workplace, and I was really in that column abrupt in wants and needs and asking for what you need and don't assume that HR knows, especially because HR, no offense to you people that are in HR, they're usually younger and
Yeah.
have not had an experience. In fact, when I was doing my grief of the workplace, I did much better CEO and C-suites because it was more of a timely situation of a death. So anyway, that's how it all started with me writing and with the book around grief in the workplace is really a guide of how to handle people returning to work, what to say, what not to say, and truly what is the timeline? Because that's the first question that anybody in corporate America asks, or it could be a restaurant, it doesn't have to be corporate
Right.
America.
Right.
Ask, what can I expect? What's the timeline? So.
And how do you answer that? I know you just earlier said there isn't we take it with us, and yet they're looking for some specific
They
guide.
are so looking for specifics, so looking because
Right.
they got a business to run and it's business as usual, no matter what their client,
Yep.
whatever type of business you have. What I really share is that in that book is you have to do the 3, 6, 9 month year pulse of what's going on. Because if you're stagnant at 6 months, you got to kind of look at a different thing about this. But giving grace period for the first 3 months to find their cadence. I try to tell everybody it costs more money to train and hire somebody new than it does to just be patient and have everybody step up a little bit, so especially the manager, because most cases the manager could do the job of the people that are, I don't like the word, but below them. Is that so? Just, breathe for the first 3 months and just try to cover and deal with it. And then take the pulse and see if we've got, forward momentum down the field with the ball. And if we do, then that's the approach you take. If you don't have any forward momentum, you got to look at it and say, okay, who can I get in here to help me a little bit? And how do I do that?
Well, yeah. Do have you ever gone into a workplace if they brought you in because there's been a few losses at a particular job or company and said, "Hey, can you help our staff or our team or anybody deal with some of these losses?"
For 20 plus years, I've been doing that. Yes, I go in. It's interesting now because of remote that I do a lot of more of this situation. In fact, right after we get off this, I'm going to do empathy in the workplace, but I'll go in. The acute is the first couple days. I do have strong feelings about the being acute in the first couple days because no one's listening to you. So I believe, and that's what I tell them, is that yes, having a counselor, the schools say that all the time. We have a counselor on site. No one's
Right.
going to talk at that
Right.
point of the
They can't.
situation.
Right.
All people want, whether you're at work or at school, is to be with your loved ones because you want to feel safe. You can't hear anything, but it's great to have it because I think there's something you should be there just to calm the
Yeah.
situation.
Presence, right?
Anyway, I've been many times, and my real messaging that's there is that unfortunately, business as usual, and you have to figure out how to be a team player to get them there and just you got to keep going on it and you got to figure out how to just like they say in show business, you break a heel, you keep dancing. You just have to kind of show and then but you have to take care of yourself and your work group, and that's what I stress in the workplace is you might have business as usual, but that doesn't mean you have to do something for the emotional side of these people.
Right. Right. And is that if they've had, like, uh, let's say for your team, they had to support you. If let's say you came back to work and you were the one that had the death, right? And they had to support you. So there's conversations around how does the staff support somebody like you who's worked for them and is grieving. But then let's say your husband's team, they had a loss and maybe they didn't even know you, right? You different department, whatever. Do you also then go in and talk to teams who actually a employee has died?
So
And
I call it the three hats, and I literally used to go in my presentations with the three hats. It's you returning to work after the loss of what you just described. It's
yeah,
the work group that has lost
yeah,
somebody, like, how do they
yeah,
deal with the loss and all that?
yes,
And then it's actually the company that is management. How do you deal with all of
yeah,
that situation? So I literally used to walk in with three hard hats with
brilliant,
something, it's just something on the front of it was my prop that I used to walk in with.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I explained a little bit on my side, and we should probably do a full segment on this someday. But
yes, it's
I talk about my side. I was returning to work, and I could tell you the biggest hardship for me was people dancing around me, and not. And that's I'm doing a program on the elephant in the room later. Is
yeah,
that like what people danced around me because they didn't know how to handle me at all levels, including management, didn't know what to do. And then my husband's work group, they didn't know, there's a hole. And how do you can't just put someone else in that chair. You got to figure out, and I talk about some creative ways is actually changing the flow of the office, whatever. And then the last group is really the employer, and what that includes management, HR, and your coworkers. Is
yeah,
how do you deal with that situation? And the lessons in that, the real messaging there is that you might have guidelines as the book that I wrote, you might have guidelines, but it's not one size fits all. You have to see what their needs are. We don't know what the financial situation, we don't know what's happening behind their front door. So we don't know financial, we don't know daycare assistance, we don't know what type of person that is. Are they really emotional? We don't know if they're sleeping at night. There's so much as HR manager and coworkers that we
yeah,
don't know what's happening.
right. Brilliant. I mean, so much, right?
Right.
And how many people even watching this have even thought about the three hats, literally, right? The three hats that have to go on. Later today, I'm going to a senior care facility as the hospice chaplain and leading my first grief cafe for all of them who are there. There'll be 20 or 25 senior adults to just have a safe place to talk about losses and or changes in their life. A lot of them are there now because a spouse has died, right? And they don't all either talk about it, know how to talk about it. So I'm kind of herding the elderly fun cats, right? to get them together and just allow them to have a safe place to express. And
Right.
the facility's so glad, right? Because they
Yeah.
know that these folks need a place, but it's mostly, like you said, to be heard and seen and loved. But yeah, it's everywhere.
So my
Uh,
fourth hat that I don't usually use, but it's a thought, is that there's so many widows and or people, whatever your type of death, that choose to go back to the workplace after a loss. Maybe they have to for finances, maybe livelihood, maybe whatever reason. And then how do you handle those people that come in? But I try to stay away from that because I believe that somebody that wants to go, unless they really have to go back to work, I think that they're going to try to find a fit that's appropriate for them.
Yeah, definitely. So to put a bow on that first book we're talking about, because I know there are going to be people listening who are like, "Oh my gosh, this applies to me in some way." Even if they're the one that the loss has happened to, it could be for them on how to navigate the workplace as the one who's experiencing the loss. Is that right?
Yeah, and in addition is that I've had a lot of people that have attended my programming that are parents of, work age people, that maybe have lost, do a lot in widows, so that, that's usually a younger death.
Yeah.
Usually where my area is, I'm not working seniors, I work
Right.
with the more at the younger group. And when I'm spending time with them, there sometimes seems to be a lot of people, let's say, call it my age, that are coming in support of their children. And
Mm.
what I think the bow on that is that they get ideas to tell their children, ask for what you need. And when I'm in HR presentations, especially at a conference at HR, I tell HR to put one finger in one ear and listen only a little bit, because I really suggest things to the griever or to the person returning to work, which is the griever, or the workplace that is,
Right.
dealing with the loss of employee, that there's subjectivity around the loss, and that there's subject, even though there's policies at corporate America, or any business, it's not even corporate America, there's policies, but policies aren't laws. So let's look at this a little bit differently and try not to do a one size fits all. And that, HR and managers don't really want to hear that. Why should they?
Right.
Why should they?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that workbook, it's guidebook, workbook, guidebook,
Guidebook.
workbook.
I just call it comprehensive guide for being prepared, because I really think everybody should read it before something happens so they know what to do. But
It's
that's
called
my perfect world that not everybody lives in.
Grief in the Workplace, right?
Yes. Yep.
We're going to put a link to all this, but I
Okay.
want people to hear that. Okay. So, you know, as you're going through all of your own journey, you're finding other opportunities or needs to speak to. And somewhere along the way, is this where the Finding Peace book comes about?
Actually, Finding Peace was at the end, because, or the more recent, because that is
Yeah.
actually, for the listeners, we'll get to that. That's Finding Peace, one piece at a time. That's what you do with the possessions. But
It,
what kind of came up next is just, it's the infancy of the internet and people searching for people. It's so different now because now there's 10, 20,000 people come out, like there was nothing back then on some of the things that we were talking about. But a lot of it was through my grief in the workplace and presenting at corporations and other facilities, a lot of restaurant stuff. There seems to be deaths around restaurants or the employees that are there,
yeah.
and smaller mom and pops of how they handle that. Working with them, just, networking is the best way to do it. You don't, I don't spend a lot of time on social media because I don't have to, because people just market. I found you through somebody else. It's not,
Right.
you didn't find me through scrolling through
Right.
my LinkedIn.
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, I did find that, working with just doing different things. And I got a call from somebody that was trying to put together Camp Widow. Her husband was died young, but he was on a bicycle and he was hit from behind, sudden loss as well. So this whole Camp Widow notion that's been going on for 15 years, pretty cool for, different day. But
Yeah.
um, that leads to me presenting somewhere there, and this leads to the next thing, and this leads to the next
Oh,
thing. And
yeah.
we started agree. So I started doing national conferences is really what I started doing, gaining a lot of data from different people, but also started a grief and loss center in Colorado, and working on that grief and loss. We started in 2001. Oh, by the way, 9/11 happened the same year. So that changed my trajectory of traveling. I still traveled a lot for grief in the workplace, but for that first year after 9/11, people were pulling in so many different ways. So I started running a lot of groups, and one of the groups that I was doing widow, loss of a parent, general grief. And what I loved about my approach to it at the time was I'm peer support. Sorry to all your listeners that have a lot of different degrees. I have degrees, but they're just not I have an EMT degree, but I mean, I'm just saying they're not necessarily psychology type. And that's where living with loss came from. So 365, I'll just kind of hold it up.
Yeah.
365 lessons in loss of grief. Or loss. That's why I call it loss. Remember, I said earlier I don't love the words
Right.
bereavement, mourning, or just the grief. So living with loss, because that's what we have to do. I
Yes.
have 365 what I call lessons and thoughts and loss. Some of them are I'm really nice. Some days they're short blurbs. There's a place at the bottom of the page to write a journal entry if you want to write something about it. You don't have to, but and what I really my notion in and thought pattern in writing that book was tidbits of daily just something. So some days I'm really nice to my readers and I say sit on the couch and eat bonbons and stream really bad stuff, like bad TV. And other
Right.
days, like having one meal out of the house, that means you have to get up, you have to get dressed, you have to call somebody, you have to make a plan, you have to get there, whether walking or driving. You have to sit there for an hour and listening to them and trying to talk. But then on your way home, you say, oh, that wasn't so bad. Maybe I'll do it again, which is organically a way of working through and getting back out of the house.
Brilliant.
I have 365 of those. And my
Yeah.
publisher tried to actually, the editor for the publisher tried to catch me on that I had repeat, and they came back and said I didn't. Happy.
Showed them. It sounds like, yeah, one day you're good cop, next day you're bad cop. I mean, or
Some of it, but there's a
well,
lot of analogies. Like I talk about, one day I'll talk about waves, the waves of loss, how it hurts. It's
yeah,
just like the ocean. Some days the oceans will go out and they'll come back and there's no seaweed. And
yeah,
other days it goes out because there's a storm brewing somewhere that brings seaweed. So what's the difference between that going through our loss and the ocean?
right. Yeah, it works, right?
It works. Yeah,
It
yeah, yeah.
works.
So
Yeah.
that's 365 of those.
Yeah. So I'm processing in real time, so this will be fun. So I so often use the word grief, and I would say living with grief, but I'm trying on, is that different for you? If I say, and for me, it's if I say living with grief or living with loss in my brain, I categorize it similar. But talk to me about for you those nuances of those so that I can get into your brain more.
Okay, so I think age group is a big factor in the terminology. So we need to be careful on not doing one size fits all
Yep.
because I think elder people, seniors, they like the word grief. They like that to define where they are. They like to wear their rings forever. They don't have necessarily the next phase. So
Yes.
they are living in grief. So we need to be careful of a one size fits all here. I
Yep.
my group or my demographics of the work that I do, I try to be a little bit younger in my people. So
Yeah.
to be younger in my people, to define yourself forever that you're in grief is difficult because then there's not necessarily an opportunity for people around you. Like they don't know how to react to that. So there's a put off. Does that
Right.
make sense? Like if I told everybody that I lost my husband and my daughter was 2 at my current age, they're defining me that I'm still grieving it or I'm still this or I'm still that. So I say living with loss. If somebody loses a child untimely, out of sequence, they're living that forever.
Yes.
They weren't use the word I'm grieving 15 years later, their new friends are going to run away from them because they're going to say she's stuck. I don't think of it as stuck. I just say using
Right.
the word loss is that you have to listen. When my daughter graduated high school, I had my late husband's parents on one side and I had my living husband's on the other side and I'm crying and my girlfriends are saying to me, "Oh my gosh, you're going to be an empty nester. Deal with it." And they had no clue and that's like years afterwards, right? I'm like, it's nothing to do with empty nester. I was crying because I was the lucky one that got to watch her get the diploma. My late husband didn't have that opportunity.
Right. Right.
And so that's living with loss.
Mm.
That's, 16 years after he's dead. That's not I'm grieving it. I'm just sad that I got to sit here today and he didn't. Can I have that?
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yep.
That's
So
yeah,
that's why, so I'm careful with it. To me, grieving, as I said a couple times, grief, mourning, and bereavement appear to be time bound for some people. And
yeah,
that's why I like to use the word loss because I lost my mom when she was 21 years ago. Okay. She was still 70, but that's still considered young. There's five of
yeah.
us, so that's complicated. But if I said that, every Thanksgiving when my mom's not there, we miss her.
Right. Yeah.
That's not grief. I mean, it's a form of grief, but in my vernacular,
Right.
in
Right.
my vernacular, I just say, it's a loss.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. Okay, that's helpful. I think I'm that. I don't know if I'm in the older generation. I just grief was a way to name it, but I'm gonna keep practicing and framing it differently to get out of the maybe the potential time bound or the triggers for some people around that word.
But you're hospice. Your background is hospice. Hospice is, which I think is beautiful, like palliative care. I think we make such a big deal about the first breath. We poo-poo the last breath in society. And
Yeah.
so for me, hospice palliative workers hanging out in that is anticipatory loss. That is anticipatory grief. How do you put your arms around that?
Yeah.
So I think grief in your world is an appropriate word
Yeah.
because you are in that acute,
Yeah. Right.
anticipatory, and immediate loss. People
Yeah.
say to me, how did you choose which area of loss you're working with? If I was younger, I would probably do some hospice, but I'm doing EMT work, so I'm still getting in there.
Yeah.
But to me, I just think that area is so emotional, and the reason why I'm doing loss afterwards is that I like to rebuild people's lives. I like to my presence and my feeling of hope
Yeah.
resonates with them.
That's great. What a great gift to
I
be.
try.
Yeah. Right.
Someday I
Yeah.
try.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the, I don't know, redemptive, or that's the continuation of living with loss, I guess, long enough, and finding ways to be sources of hope and encouragement for others.
Right. A little funny story. And when I was running the Grief and Loss Center, working and doing, I was executive director, I was doing programming, et cetera. Somebody in my class said to me, how do you differentiate between your own life and you're absorbing all these people's hardship? And I said, well, and somebody once said this to me, you put them in the back seat, you turn around to them when you're driving home from that situation and you say, listen, you're okay. You're going to be okay. My garage is 50 degrees. You'll be okay out there tonight. Like, we'll see you in the morning. I'm in New
Yeah.
York City doing a presentation, right? This big, huge presentation. I'm trying to make some levity, and I tell them that tell them to stay in the car in the back. Somebody not only just raises their hand, they stand up and they say, people in New York don't have garages. I thought it was pretty funny because it's the same, it gets the message across is that you have to leave it somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a garage, that was my
Right.
analogy, but you need
Right.
to leave it somewhere. On the
The sub,
subway, leave
the
it on the
subway.
subway
That's what
overnight.
it's warm in the subways, right?
It's
Just
warm in the subways.
interesting. Okay, so that's living with loss, one day at a time. I love
Yep.
that. So that helps me. I spent a lot of years working in the recovery space, and the one day at a time is such a beautiful language, anyways, about navigating recovery, right, or sobriety and those types of things. One day at a time. So I
Right.
like that. Yeah. Okay. Then now, can we talk about stuff? Tell us
Stuff
about
and
stuff,
things. Don't forget the things. You can't
stuff,
just have
and
stuff without
stuff,
things.
stuff and things.
So this started through my Soaring Spirits International, which is Camp Widow. I
Yep.
started a program there, 15. Well, I've done this more because I do TAPS, which is Tragedy Assistant Program for
Yep.
Military Families. But I started this program on cleaning out the closets. And then I didn't like that terminology because people would come up to me at the conference and say to me, I already cleaned out his closet, her closet, their closet. But I'm like, okay, this isn't what I mean because cleaning the closet out, you still put it in boxes and it's at your house. So
Right.
I had to change that. So we did from heirlooms to underwear. What do you do with your loved one's possessions? So I was speaking on that for a while, and then my 5 year point of my living with loss, publisher comes to me and says, Rachel, every 5 years you got to write, at least every 5 years, you got to write a book because it gets to re-promote your previous,
Right.
and that it's time. So I said, I know exactly what I'm writing about because I think it's such a great topic on personal possessions. So I said that I wanted to title it From Heirlooms to Underwear. So the person that you're working with, the group that, the think tank that you're working with for titling says it's not Googleable. Okay. So I then went to, my first one is Living with Loss One Day at a Time. So I went to my dear friend who does documentaries all the time. And I said, Sharon, help me. I've got this
Right.
Living with Loss One Day at a Time. You help me with that wonderful title. Help me with the next one. And she said, it's finding peace because you're really finding peace with those, not the black slacks. You got 25 pairs of black slacks. Who cares?
Right.
Right. But it's
Right.
finding peace with the real heirlooms. So we titled it Finding Peace One Piece at a Time, clearly a play on words,
Sure. Yep.
what to do with your loved one's possessions. And your next question is going to be, what's the science?
Right.
Like, how do you have science 1-0 black, white, on, off? How do you have
Yeah.
science with this? If it does not present if it doesn't present a connection and it doesn't tell a story, we don't need to keep it.
Okay.
So that's the key. That's the key. I gave you the farm. Listen, we're on our first call of
Right.
life together, and I gave you the farm.
That's amazing. So you start speaking. I mean, you're already speaking on that. You write the book. What were some of the? What were a couple of some, people that are attending or listening or zooming in, and they're giving you feedback or stories? What are a couple of the mind blowing stories that you can talk about how people dealt with this stuff?
Okay, so from a professional piece, I was shocked at the response from finance and real estate. I didn't see that coming, but from finance is some of the bigger things that need to be divided by children, especially if it's a sudden death and they don't have a plan. So
Yeah.
that did a whole new arm of what I'm doing because that's more of pre-planning, that's more of
Mhm.
future fighting with the children,
Yeah.
value, where does that fit into the estate? That's
Mhm.
totally different. That became a planning device. Real estate, I didn't see coming, was people are not downsizing because they don't know what to do with their stuff.
Mhm.
So that's living. Those two are living. Those are not, those that's pre-planning as opposed to what I originally wrote the book for is how do you sort thin and go through a loved one's possessions. So if you're talking my biggest aha of the book
Yeah.
was I had blinders on. I was myopic in my thought of this is about someone dead or dying,
Yeah.
not the other side of it, planning
Yeah.
or
Wow.
or what I call that they were stuck on.
Yeah. Did you say people aren't downsizing because they don't know what to do with their stuff? Like
That's a
literally?
real estate perspective, is
Yeah.
that you have a house that is filled to the brim. You've raised your 4 kids in it, 3 kids in it. The
Right.
sorting and thinning through all that. What do you do with it? Some age groups are still in that war zone that, everything has a purpose, even when it doesn't have a purpose. And the really scary part is when you can't find something, Amazon's there in the afternoon that you order in the morning. So you don't even have to look through your stuff. So now you have multiple, the kitchens, the third bedrooms, the basements, the attics. Where do you start with it? Which to me is one of my biggest points in my presentations. It's not fair to leave that to your children. And if you don't have children, you're leaving it to siblings. And if you don't have siblings, you're leaving it to neighbors.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah.
That's where the real estate and downsizing came in for me. My thought of writing the book was, we'll use the word grief, was grief related. How do I sort through a
Right.
closet? A lot of stories around that. I'm not sure in our time that we have left is that
Yeah.
maybe there's a segment just on, what to do with your loved ones, downsizing, whatever we title it, is to
Yeah.
talk specifically about that because there's great ways of honoring and telling the stories. And so many in my ideas of that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And that's why I think people aren't getting to it is that I have to clean, sort, get rid of my late husband's stuff. But if you look at that differently and think of the memories around it and the connections around it,
Yeah.
Just a real quick story is that I'm in Colorado, and I was doing a program at University of Denver, and if it was a big program, and the woman in the back of the room, raised her hand, and she said to me, I have all my husband's stuff. I don't know what to do with it, but I don't want to even, we got hiking, I got grandkids, I could ski, I'm outside, and she said, I just don't get to it. And it's been years. And my thought to her was the want isn't high enough.
Mm.
It's not high enough that you want to deal with it. And a lot of it is people, the word don't want to deal with it, right? They
Yeah.
don't want to deal with it, so we avoid it. But to
Right.
me, and when I've helped people through Zooms and other programming, because I could go in your house, the Zoom has been a wonderful thing because I could go in your house with you and
Yeah.
consult you on it. Is
Right.
that what I've learned from the conversations, it's you just don't know where to begin. You don't know, you think it's going to be daunting, and I don't think it's daunting. I think it's beautiful. That's my opinion.
Yeah. That's awesome. How much time we have left? I got you for maybe 10 more minutes. Anything that you specifically it's on your heart or mind? Because I have a couple more questions, but there might be something that you go, oh, let's do this next. So we're on a roll.
I like your questions, but I will tell just a shout out to the audiences of the people that are listening is that we're giving terms, we're giving ideas, we're giving matter of fact. I've been doing this for a really long time. If you're fresh and new to this, please don't think that you need to jump into anything, any of these conversations, whether it's the workplace, whether it's figuring out how to live with your loss, or even sorting and thinning through your loved ones' possessions. We're giving you ideas. We're planting seeds, spring is coming, depending on where you live. Spring is coming.
Right.
Let them, just come up and come back. And, the beauty of this podcast is you could come listen to this in 6 months. So, some of it might resonate with you, but my real suggestion is if it's too much, it's too intense, the speed of which we're talking, just bring it down a notch, go do your thing for a little bit and come back and listen to it.
It's great. Yeah. I think again, here's where I'll ask this question because maybe I am in the hospice space, and doing all the senior care things. In fact, I'm going to a facility next Monday I met the executive director, and they recently had two long-term residents pass. And I said, and he says, yeah, our staff, they were really beloved by our staff. And I said, how do you guys as a staff handle this? And I appreciate it, kind of humorous and honest. He goes, hey, we just put our head down and keep going. And he was kind of telling the truth, like we don't have tools and stuff. And he said, can you come to even a staff meeting and just do a little bit of support and care, right? So I guess I'm always thinking about, this grief, honoring, remembering, especially if it's a fresh death. But there are grief groups out there. You started grief groups, support groups, grief counseling, grief cafes. What's a principle? Somebody's looking, they've had a recent death or a type of loss, and they feel like they need a place. Are there some suggestions you can offer for those that are currently in grief? Some places, some what to look for.
So I don't want to insult any audiences, so that's why I hesitated. I think there needs to be a blend of professional and peer.
Yeah.
I think finding somebody that can think like you do through a loss. Obviously, all these other support groups like an AA or, even a mom, a recent birth for moms, the
Yep.
moms group. I
Yep.
think having peers that you can say things to without people thinking you're going to jump off a bridge, I
Yeah.
think is really important. So, for example, I think when you find like my four sisters, love them dearly, but they couldn't imagine what I was going through. And suggestions that they might give me might feel like they're fixing me. Well, there's nothing to fix when you have a substantial loss. When
Right.
you get with a peer that's what I loved about our Camp Widow work and our widow work, is that when you meet a peer that has like a preschooler or a toddler, for me to tell you you're going to be okay, and it's like just little suggestions that I made, dress them the night before if you have to. Like, don't sleep
Yeah.
in pajamas, think of the next day clothes. They won't know the difference,
Right.
just kind of like little things like that to just work through. That's not going to come from a professional counselor. That's going to come from somebody that is walking your journey, that's going to ease your stress, that's going to give you allow you time to put your arms around what happened to you. So I think a combination of peer support and professional support, depending on where you are. The thing
Yeah.
that I try to stay, and when we first met, I talked to you about that I'm not a woo-woo person. What I am is current and relevant. And unfortunately, I had to go back to work. I needed healthcare benefits. I had a big job. I had to do that. So my challenges were not necessarily, oh my goodness, I lost my husband. My challenges were, how do I survive day to day? And that's why you need to do a combination of both, because you need a professional to tell you that you've got to work through this grief, and you've got a peer to tell you, here are some great tips and tricks to get from day to day.
Wow. Yes. Hadn't thought of that. Um, yeah. The groups I lead, I don't see myself as a professional, right? Because I haven't done a whole directive on doing grief therapy, but I sure love to create the safe space, set the guidelines, bring folks together, and then let them share and then support one another, and then always try to err on the side of them not fixing or giving advice, but offering mostly a listening ear, but suggestions, but mostly through their own story of what they found has worked for them, so that the new person doesn't come in and everybody else turns on them and offers them 25 suggestions on what to do, right?
Right. And that's what I'm really careful about in the workplace. I don't give you 70 things. I give you
Right.
3 things,
Yep.
help them
Yep.
return to work, give them something, show some kind of gesture towards the loss. Really simple tasks that, listen, in essence, we all like to give.
Yeah,
We may not think we do, but sometimes giving is easier than receiving.
for sure. Yeah. What are there have you done a study on other cultures? What do other cultures do with grief and loss, and how do they do it, navigate it any better? Do you know?
I don't have, it's not fair for me to say better or worse. I don't
Yeah.
have that. My real indication that there are so many different things between religion and, physical cultures of, where you're from. But I mean, even within a religion, there's cultures,
Yeah.
different
Right.
cultures. So there's a lot that's going on there. My most exposure till I had with this was the workplace, because when I went into one company, the person that had passed was there was a big, more of a manufacturing type thing, but there was a big site. And the person that was at the front desk was the person that suddenly had a heart attack. And when I went in there and listened to what people were saying about the loss, their biggest thing that they were saying is that there's an empty chair.
Mm.
There is. But the biggest thing that I also took away from them was that they were struggling with what different thoughts around that. So one person might say they're in a better place. I don't think they're in a better place at 50 years old. Okay. Another person said we have 24 hours and then we're not allowed to, from my industry, from where I come from, you can't mourn it anymore. And then I have somebody else that says, we need 30 days of just, respite around this. So there are different things. And unfortunately, my exposure to it makes it very messy and complicated.
In the death doula training stuff, they had us read several books on, death phobia, death denial of death, right? Things like that, and how other cultures handled it. So I was just curious if, in the same way, other cultures might deal with, grief and loss. But you're right. Even in between religious cultures, or people in the same religion might embrace it differently, even based on their own experience, right? If they've experienced a significant loss, they may be used to say, "Oh, they're in a better place," and then once they lose someone close to them, they'll never say it again, right?
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a saying with that, is that, somebody's really, you're in hospice, someone's really suffering, maybe they're not, like, that term needs to be defined. After they pass, maybe it is, they're thankful that there's no more suffering. But the
Absolutely.
better place is, for me, and I don't want to get into religion, is at the dinner table with me,
That's right.
or
Yeah.
in my bed with me, or,
Yeah,
in
that's right.
my whatever,
And I
whatever,
think
at the
everyone would
soccer
agree with
game,
that. Right.
at the music, recital.
Yeah. That's what I always hear people say. There is no better place than right here with me. So
Right.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah. Or God needed him more up there. What?
Yeah. But I mean, there's religious beliefs, and I will accommodate to them. But what I say is the work that I do is the bridge to my reality, which is, it's current and relevant, and we still have to go to work. Unfortunately, we're not cave people that, even the cave people had to go out and get food.
Yeah, right. Do you, what did you end up doing with your uh, husband who passed? His remains earned? Did he do a burial? Did
So interesting. We did a bunch of different things. We did a cremation because he was so young. We did a lot of his favorite places. I believe in something outside of a cemetery because I believe in life. You need to, as I said earlier, you need to just take this person with you, along
yeah,
the way. And I
yep,
think the cemetery to me is not there. You could do the cemetery, great, but have a memorial somewhere else. So when you want to memorialize with your loved one, that you're
yes,
not always going back to a cemetery that is heavier, in my
yes,
opinion.
yeah,
Although I do, wherever I go, my living husband says to me, "You never miss a cemetery." I love going and reading. I love
yeah,
that.
yeah,
But that's for a whole different day too. But anyway, I did a combination to answer your questions. We cremated, we brought him to a lot of different places. We really memorialized him up on a mountain in Colorado. We just have a bunch of different things that we do around that. I
yeah,
wanted to keep him alive. A lot of my challenges are I'm originally from Connecticut and everybody has moved. People say to me, "Oh, do you have any family living in Connecticut?" And I'm like, "Yeah, everybody's dead." You know,
right,
we left
right,
them all in a cemetery, and I
yeah,
have a little thing around that. And I think that's my untimely death. Like aging, like burying my grandparents in Connecticut was the right thing. They were there. But
right,
untimely is I move. We're moving around, we're doing things, we're a mobile
yeah,
society. And
right,
to leave somebody, I was in Kansas
sure,
City, that's where Sprint was when my husband died. I couldn't leave him there.
right, yeah, right. Wow, yeah, yeah, very different
Yeah,
times with a portable, movable, mobile society.
right.
Rachel, this has been lovely, fascinating, fun because you're all those things and your experiences and how you have chosen to share those with so many of us. Really powerful.
Well, and I want to thank you, Keith, because your questions and your prompts are great. But I just want to end to your audience the word that he chose to talk about our last 50 minutes together. He called it lovely. And I would love for your audience to think about we can't change what happened to us, but we can look at it in a way that we're embracing it and making it come to our heart. So when he says lovely, it's not only about your first breath, it's about your last breath too. The dash in between is the most important. I won't lie to that. But I do believe you using a word as we're talking with grief, bereavement, mourning, that you used that we had a lovely conversation. I just want the audience to embrace that there's a lot of love.
There is so much. Well, thank you. I'm going to have you back.
All right.
Now we're friends, you know.
We're friends. We're past the acquaintance. We're past the
Yeah, we're
colleague.
friends, man. I'm going to
We've
get you.
moved on.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to do some real life event sometime and get you out here to
I
Tennessee.
would love to do that.
That'd
Remind
be
me,
cool.
you're Tennessee, right?
Yeah, East
Yeah,
Tennessee,
I
man.
would love to come. I would love to come.
Okay, we'll make
Well,
it happen.
to the audience, remember, today is about planting seeds
Yeah,
and let them grow when you need them to grow. Not necessarily a Keith and my timeline, but
right.
just come back and listen again if something resonates and you weren't ready for it.
Good words. Everyone, thank you for joining us. Rachel, rock star.
Pleasure.
And we'll see you down the road.
Yep. Bye.
Okay, bye.